Hey there, everyone. Michael A. Bryan here. And today we are going to be revisiting something that we used to do here on the Oraculos podcast a long time ago, which is we are going to be taking a look at a blind chart, but as a group. Now, if you've been following the show for a while, you know that this concept of reading a chart cold is something that's really important to me. And it's a skill that I feel every astrologer should have in their toolkit. Because fundamentally, people coming to you for a reading, they're coming to you because they trust your ability to read a chart. And you could be the greatest counselor in the world, you could be a life coach, a hypnotherapist, but your primary duty as an astrologer is that you should be able to read a chart thoroughly and well on its own basis. And this is something that came to me a while ago when I was reading something by the late Charles Harvey, who was an amazing astrologer. And what he said was that even though we know that there are numerous factors that impact the sort of person a person will become who has a chart, and those factors could be socioeconomic factors, familial factors, where a person is born, the culture into which a person finds themselves being born within this lifetime. Even though all of these things impact the greater scope of who an individual ends up becoming, regardless of what their chart is, there's still a fundamental kernel of truth that exists within the heart of every single chart that can be read on its own merit without referencing anything else. And this skill, this ability, what it does to the astrologer is it sharpens the mind, it sharpens the eye, but it also allows you to feel as if you're truly building a relationship of trust and comfort in your own ability. Now, I always say to people that when you come and get your chart, quote unquote, blind read, this doesn't represent a sustainable method of working with clients. Client work is one thing. That's a separate thing all to its own. The ability to work with someone and stand in the gap for someone, and not only stand in that gap, but also help a person to move beyond that gap. That is a skill within itself. But beyond and beneath that skill of being able to work with the client is this foundational core skill of being able to read charts well, period. And it doesn't matter what sort of chart we're referring to, because if astrologers who are learning astrology are learning fundamental core skills of just chart reading straight across the board, it will equip those astrologers to operate within any field of astrology that they choose to endeavor in. So, to that end, today we're going to be taking a look at a number of charts that are going to be submitted by people who are currently logged in live with us right now. And we're going to see how many we can get through. And I'm going to be showing you how we here at Oraculos move through the body of a chart to really pull forward that which is within the chart itself. So I hope you do enjoy. So the very first thing that we want to do is we want to go and grab a notebook because at Oraculos, we sketch everything out as we're doing it so that we can have a systematic way of moving through the information. So I have my notebook here on the side of me. And in the notebook, what we're going to be doing is just heading it with the name of whoever's chart this is. So this is chart number one, and we're going to dive into that now. So we have chart number one. Now, the very next thing that we take a look at is the ascendant period by itself. There was a brilliant astrologer back in the day by the name of Zoltan Mason, and Zoltan was asked in a class once, Zoltan, in a 60-minute reading, how much time do you spend on the ascendant? And Zoltan said, 60 minutes. And I love that. And this is a story that I heard from another great astrologer, Robert Corey. And it really stuck with me because this has always been my personal persuasion to reading anything. You know, it's not that the chart has too little information, but it's that the chart has too much information. And as professional astrologers, our fundamental job is to read the chart, one. But secondly, our even greater job is to be able to organize information. So, as astrologers, we are fundamentally organizing the information that is within the body of a chart so that we can know how to move through that chart with a little bit more finesse and skill and grace. So, the very first thing that we do is we start at the ascendant, and we know that this ascendant is at 8 degrees Sagittarius, 21 minutes. And the very next thing that we would do, just because it's something that we do, is we take a look at the D3, which would be the decan of the ascendant. And by decan, I'm referring to the third divisional chart from the perspective of Arabic or even Vedic astrology. And then we'll take a look at the D12. Now, whenever I do this, people oftentimes get very uneasy because they're like, why are you integrating something from another tradition into the traditional landscape of your astrology? And the truth is that this was also a part of medieval astrology. This concept of using the Dodecata Moria was a part of our medieval system of astrology, as well as this concept of using the third divisional chart, which we find more strongly utilized within the Vedic tradition. So anyway, that's why we're going to use that in terms of the ascendant. So we're going to take a look at the D3 as well as the D12. Now, when we separate this ascendant and chop it into 3 segments, giving 1 segment each to the 3 signs of the same triplicity, we have the D3 here being Sagittarius, because the D3 is to divide the sign into 3 segments, and the first 10 degrees will belong to Sagittarius. The second 10 degrees will belong to the next sign of that same triplicity, which would be Aries, and the third division of 3 would belong to the final sign in that triplicity, which would be Leo. So we have the Sagittarius as the D3, and then the D12 is taking that same 30 degrees of the ascendant and dividing it essentially into segments of 2.5 degrees each throughout the entire 30 degrees. So at 8 degrees 21 minutes, we know that this would be the Dodecata Moria, or the Dwad, of the first square to this ascendant, which is Pisces. So the D12 of the ascendant is Pisces. And if you don't know how to work that out in your head, what you can do is hop on over to the Vedic section, even though it is a medieval Western astrology method as well. It's stored in Solify in the Vedic section. And you go to D12, you press OK. And here we see that if you were to divide this ascendant into 12 segments, we would have the division of Sagittarius belonging to Pisces that would be rising here. So we get more information about the native through that lens. And you may be wondering at this point, why do we even want to do any of that anyway? And the reason why we do these things is because we want more information in understanding the soul of the native. The ascendant within traditional astrology is representing the soul, the psyche, the thing that moves a person from deep within themselves. And so I'm really wanting to understand what is going on. What is the primary motivation within the heart of this person? So we have those things. Now, the next thing that we would take a look at would be the term ruler of the ascendant. And 8 degrees Sagittarius is 8 degrees 21 minutes Sagittarius is having Venus as the term ruler, because Jupiter rules up until 8 degrees of Sagittarius, Venus rules up until 14 degrees, Mercury rules up until 19 degrees, then we have Saturn ruling up until 25 degrees, and we have Mars ruling up until 30. So here we're having the term of Venus rising, and this is a little bit tricky because when it comes to subdividing the signs into their degrees, we always have to be careful and ask ourselves, is this a valid time of birth? Because if this time of birth was off by even 1 minute, then we more than likely wouldn't have these 21 minutes of arc here, and we would be flush in the terms of Jupiter. So I'm going to put it down, even though for me, it kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies that this is the term of Venus, and then we move on. Now, the next consideration that we take is what is the antition as well as the contra-antition of the ascendant. Why? Because it gives us more information. So 8 degrees Sagittarius is having 22 degrees Capricorn as its antition. And we know that between Sagittarius and Capricorn, Sagittarius is commanding, Capricorn is obeying. So we have Capricorn, 22 Cap, as being the antition of this person. And we go in the chart and we see, is there anything here at 22 Capricorn? And the answer is no. So the next thing that we ask is, well, what is the contra-antition? The contra-antition of 8 degrees of Sagittarius is 22 degrees of Cancer. So we check and see, is there anything at 22 degrees Cancer? And while we don't, well, blow me down, while we don't have anything at 22 degrees specifically, what we do have is Uranus at 21 degrees of Cancer with 53 minutes of arc. So this is pretty close, because if you give this Uranus 8 more arc minutes, this would definitely be our 22 degrees Uranus that we're searching for. And it's even more so accurate because not only is the Uranus having minutes of arc, but also the ascendant is having minutes of arc. So what we write down on our paper is ascendant equals Uranus, which gives us information. Ascendant equals Uranus. We've just said that Uranus is the contra-antition of the ascendant. And if we were to drop over to the 360-degree dial, this would be a lot more clear for you to see. The 360-degree dial is built on this concept of antition and contra-antition. So since we're looking for the contra-antition, we put the pointer here on the Aries, and we see the ascendant is here. And literally, from the ascendant, we have the Uranus connected by this line, which is saying that the Aries, 0 degrees Aries, is the midpoint of the ascendant and Uranus. Now, if none of that makes sense to you right now, it's completely okay, because we're really only focusing on the delineation at this point. So we have the ascendant having its contra-antition with Uranus. And then the next thing that we do in order to dive in is we quickly take a look at any other aspects that are happening to this ascendant. So I hold on to that degree of 8 degrees in my mind and I rush around the chart. And the first thing that I see is we have the moon, which is within a traditional orb of being square to the ascendant. So we can put moon square ascendant. Then the next thing that we have going around here is we have the Jupiter would technically be in a quincunx to the ascendant, but it's a bit wide. When it comes to quincunxes, we really only want to give our quincunxes 1 degree of any sort of orb. And so with the Jupiter at 6 degrees, that's a little bit too wide for me. But this Jupiter is the ruler of that ascendant. So I am going to put there Jupiter quincunx the ascendant, because it's very interesting when you have the ruler of the ascendant quincunx the ascendant. So we have Jupiter quincunx the ascendant, and we continue to run around the charts. Nothing with the Mercury. We already mentioned the Uranus. We have the Venus is having a trine with the ascendant, and this is the sinister trine of Venus. And as we know, there's a difference between our sinister aspects and our dexter aspects. So here we have Venus having her sinister trine to that 8 degrees of Sagittarius there, which is a good thing. And it even further feels good to us because we already know that we've said that this person is born with Venus being the term ruler of that ascendant. So now that we have that in our mind, seeing this trine from Venus to the ascendant is only a further confirmation. So we have Venus trine the ascendant. Part of fortune is neither here nor there. And the Pluto is also neither here nor there. The Neptune, no. And the Saturn, no. Now, the very final thing that we do is I personally, because I am a Uranian astrologer as well, I take a look at the sesquiquadrates as well as the semi-squares. So we know that 8 degrees of the mutable signs equals 23 degrees of the cardinal signs. So we're looking for 23 cardinal to see if we have anything there at 23 cardinal, and the answer is no. Now, oh, pardon me, we have Neptune. Was that someone chiming in to say that we have Neptune at 23 cardinal? Yes, we have Neptune here at 23 cardinal without ascendant, which means that if we were to drop over to the 90-degree dial, we would see the ascendant on one side and the Neptune on the other side. So let's just go and take a look at that in case you don't believe me. So here we put the pointer on the ascendant, and so said, so done. The ascendant is on one side of the 90-degree dial, and the Neptune is on the other side of the 90-degree dial. Interesting, interesting. So we're already getting, you know, the other thing about submitting charts is that we just talk the truth here at Oraculos. So forgive me, but we're already getting a concept of this person being a dreamer, of this person being extraordinarily emotional, and of those being things that guide and that shape the form of this person's life. But we're going to take a look at one more thing, because I know that my students have already seen this, that over here at the Declinations, we have that Uranus in contraparallel to the ascendant, literally within about 20 minutes of arc. We have the Uranus contraparallel to the ascendant. So the ascendant is at southern latitude, 21 degrees, 42 minutes, and the Uranus is at 22 degrees north, 07 minutes. So even without us taking into consideration the fact that the Uranus is essentially standing on the antition of the ascendant, we have this other relationship here which further corroborates the Uranian theme within this person's life, which is they have ascendant Uranus. So we write ascendant, or rather Uranus, contraparallel C/A ascendant. So now let's talk about what all of this means. So with 8 degrees Sagittarius rising, we know that this person's fundamental operating system in life is the element that guides this sign. And the element that guides Sagittarius is the element of fire. And within fire, we have our concepts of warmth, we have our concepts of illumination, but we also have this internal theme of someone not necessarily wanting to be held back, because the fire of Sagittarius is a mercurial mutable fire. And we know that mercurial mutable fire, it needs air to spread, and it wants to spread based on its own internal inclinations. It doesn't want to be confined or locked down or held in place. Now, that would be Sagittarius as its own standalone theme, but we see other things going on with this ascendant that either amplify that message or take away from that message. And we have to know how we navigate those parameters. Now, we have that going on with the Sagittarius by itself, and we're not really going to talk much about Sag because we need to talk more about the planets and their relationships to this ascendant. So Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, and this Jupiter is in Cancer. And so the Cancerian effect of the Jupiter makes that person want to spread even more, and it makes them want to be of service even more, and it makes them want to share even more, and it gives them more of an internal inclination towards matters of the heart. We know that there are many different types of Jupiter, but here we have a Jupiter that is fundamentally driven by their emotions and driven by their idealization of the world around them. We further get this theme of the idealization of the world around me by virtue of the Neptune having its aspect or its octile aspect to the ascendant, which says that this is a person who moves into the world, and they move into the world porous. And by porous, I mean they move into the world in a way where they feel everything. Everything passes through them. They have this very visceral effect of feelings as they move within their environment. And that can be a good thing, especially if a person is working in a helping profession, or especially if a person is working within therapy or counseling or something to that effect. But the other side of this is that it can lead a person in the direction of possibly being a little bit too sensitive. And when a person is stepping forward with this much of a lack of boundaries essentially as they interact within the world, it causes that person to have a more sensitive nervous system, but it also causes that person to not necessarily have the best way of filtering their relationships with other people and really creating boundaries within those relationships. Now, this person is Jupiter in Cancer, and we know that Jupiter loves being in Cancer because Cancer is the exaltation sign of Jupiter. So we don't really get a sense that this person is so burdened by this aspect of themselves that it prevents them from being a quote unquote happy or jovial sort of person. But what we do get is that this Neptunian impact on the ascendant could possibly make a person, the word dreamy comes up, but can possibly make a person sensitive to the point of them being impacted by all of their interactions that they have with the environment. And it also sets them up to feel more deeply the pain of other people around them. And when you can feel deeply the pain of everybody else around you, what that causes is for people to be attracted to you based on that goodwill. But oftentimes, people who get attracted to us because of the size of our hearts can sometimes be in our lives with not necessarily the best intentions. So we have the moon in Pisces, we have the moon in Pisces having a trine relationship to that Jupiter. And the moon Jupiter impact is I want to feed people. I want to take care of people. I want people to enter my space and to feel held and to feel taken care of and to feel fed and to feel supported in every way possible. And the Neptunian impact on that ascendant is that, and this becomes a fundamental part of my own ideals within life. This becomes a part of my own fantasy within life, that I can continue to be this support system, this servant of people around me, so that other people can feel sheltered when they come into my space, and other people can feel taken care of when they come into my space. So what this already does for us is it makes family be a very important thing within the life of this person. And we say family, not so much because of the Jupiter being in Cancer, and we consider Cancer to be a quote unquote family oriented sign, but we say family because this Jupiter in Cancer is also the ruler of the fourth house. And when we have the ruler of houses being essentially the same ruler, what we have to think within ourselves is that that ruler is unifying within itself the meanings of those two houses. So we have the Jupiter ruling the ascendant and the fourth house. And what that says to us is that my family, my heritage, my household and home becomes deeply tied up in my own thoughts of my self-identity being a first house function. And that becomes fundamentally a part of who I am, which is the Jupiter. So we do house 4 plus house 1 gives us that Jupiter, which is how the 17th century astrologer Jean-Baptiste Morin de Villefranche would bring these houses together based on the rulership factor. So we have that in our mind already. This person's a person who wants to feed people. They have the moon Jupiter. The moon Jupiter also doesn't necessarily know when enough is enough. So as I think about this, I think about my own grandmother constantly feeding me lamb chops. And I'm like, no, grandma, I don't want to have any more lamb chops. And her just giving me, because for her, this act of standing in a feeding place for someone else was an act of the supremest sort of love. And that's the sort of feeling that we have when we deal with this chart, when we interact with this person. Now, the other factor here is that, yes, the family situation becomes very important to this person. And the family situation, we have the Jupiter, by virtue of our 5-degree rule, the Jupiter is over here within the 8th house. And the 8th house, as we know, is a house of, no one ever likes to say the D word. So we're going to circumvent the D word for literally 2 seconds and talk about the fact that the 8th house is a house of money that we get as an inheritance. And obviously, inheritance makes us think about the D word. So we say money that we may get as a result of someone dying within our lives, money that we may get as a result of it being left to us by our ancestry. And while we usually consider the 8th house to be a malefic sort of house, i.e., not really someplace where we want to spend our summer vacation. What we have here is Jupiter, a benefic, in Cancer, a benefic placement for this Jupiter, and in the eighth house, which is a wonderful sort of thing. And not only that, but we have a proper mutual reception occurring here between Jupiter and the moon. And actually, what we have here is the moon is in the sign of Jupiter. So we have the moon pushing the nature of Jupiter to Jupiter. And we know that there are multiple forms of pushing. You can push nature, you can push power, you can push two natures, you can push management. So we have these different levels of pushing when we look within our medieval systems of astrology. But here, the moon is essentially pushing the nature of Jupiter to Jupiter. And we can also call this a pushing of two natures, because not only is the moon, through her application to Jupiter, pushing onto Jupiter what belongs to Jupiter, but the moon is also the participating triplicity ruler within all water signs in general. So the moon is pushing her own triplicity rulership over to this Jupiter, as well as the moon is pushing to Jupiter, Jupiter's own domicile rulership, which further strengthens the relationship of these two planets for the better, I dare say. Now, the moon in this chart isn't necessarily the planet that we would want to spend the summer vacation with either, because the moon in this chart is the anaretic planet insofar as the moon is ruling the eighth house, the house of death. So the placement of the moon within the chart is usually indicative of death as a process or death as an experience. But here we have the moon in mutual reception with the Jupiter, in a trine relationship with that Jupiter. So the first thing that we think of is this is a person who benefits from death. So it takes us back into our initial concept of, I wonder if this person is taken care of by virtue of an inheritance received from their ancestors, or money that comes through death, or is this person taken care of by virtue of the financial stability or the financial well-being of other people in general. So those are some of the questions that we have in assessing the relationship between the moon being ruler of the eighth house, as well as the Jupiter being posited in the eighth house by virtue of our 5-degree rule. So we have that going on. Now, the very next thing that we see is the trine to the ascendant from the Venus. And here we have the Venus in Leo, also in the eighth house. Now, Venus in Leo, at 5 degrees of Leo, Venus is having no essential dignity there, because Saturn rules Leo up until 6 degrees, Mercury rules Leo up until 13 degrees, Venus rules Leo up until 19 degrees, Jupiter rules Leo up until 25 degrees, and Mars rules Leo up until 30 degrees. So Venus isn't in her own term, neither is Venus in her own anything for all intents and purposes. However, James Herschel Holden, in his book, The History of Horoscopy, or the history of natal astrology, essentially, says that the ancient Babylonians said that Venus had her exaltation in Leo. Now, when you sit down and think about that for all of 2 seconds, you can probably see why a planet like Venus would have her exaltation in a sign like Leo. Because, come on, Venus, Leo, they kind of go together. So there's that. And I always hold that in the back of my mind before I say that Venus is peregrine by virtue of being in Leo, because I know that Venus has that factor attached to it. Now, the Venus is trining the ascendant. The Venus is also the ruler of the ascendant by virtue of the term or the bound, if we take that into consideration. So we can also say that beauty is also very much a big part of this person's life, and beauty is very much tied up within the concept that this person has for how they're living and how they're moving through the world. Venus is also ruling this 11th house, which is the house of the fulfillment of desires. So there seems to be a sense of this person moving through life and getting from life what they want from life, essentially. It feels very good, but it also feels very supported by the environment. And I think that that's something that we always have to keep front and center, particularly from this chart, that this person's ability to receive support comes from this person's support that they receive from the environment around them. The other thing that we know about the eighth house is that the eighth house is the house of the liquid assets that comes through marriage, i.e., the joint resources between my spouse and I. So, with that in mind, what we might think about there is that here is a person who is greatly supported by the financial stability of their spouse. Or here is someone who is greatly benefited by that relationship to their spouse's money, essentially. Now, speaking on the topic of love, and we're going to wrap up because I at least want to get to one other chart before we're done. Speaking on the topic of love, this is a person who is having Venus square Saturn, and while the Venus has already separated from the square of Saturn, this is Venus square Saturn all the same. And because this is a daytime chart, this Saturn is also the ruler of this person's 11th house, by virtue of Saturn being the Almutin ruler of Libra in the daytime. So I have some thoughts about that, but before we go there, the Venus-Saturn as a concept in general, as we all know, can have the effect of taking away something of the sweetness that we find in terms of our love relationships. Because Saturn has always been the spoiler, or Saturn has always been the planet that causes rot and that causes suffering within our classical perspective of astrology. So with this person having this Venus-Saturn aspect, and while it's not the tightest square in the world, it's close enough for our liking in traditional astrology. We have a sense that even though this person is quote unquote taken care of, it comes with a price. And we want to ask ourselves, what exactly might this price be? So we take 2 seconds to think about that. And while we think about that for 2 seconds, we also take into consideration the fact that we haven't fully dealt with that Jupiter as being the rule of the ascendant, because this Jupiter is also picking up the opposition from Mars. So we quickly go into the chart and we take a look and we see what houses this Mars is ruling and why that Mars may stand in opposition to that Jupiter. And we see that Mars is ruling the 5th house of this person, as well as the 12th house of this person. So houses 5 and 12 are interesting because the 5th house is representing our children as a primary thing within life in general. But the 5th house, from, I want to say a Vedic perspective, but we do see inklings and intimations of this even within our classical Western astrology perspective. The 5th house does also have some relationship to love, and love as a means by which we find pleasure within our lives. So what we have to ask ourselves is, why would the ruler of this person's house of pleasure, which is also the rule of this person's house of children, but why would the rule of this person's house of pleasure be in opposition to this person themselves, is one question. And why would that same ruler also be the ruler of this person's 12th house? So we come back to this theory of, does this person have essentially the ability to establish clear boundaries within their lives between themselves and others, which we already know is probably something that's a little bit precarious for them based on everything that we've said thus far. But, and before I view the 12th house as the house of your hidden enemies, I always view the 12th house as being the house of self-undoing, because I think that it's very easy to throw off something on someone else and say, oh, this person's my hidden enemy. But I think it's a lot more meaningful for us to look at the ways in which we may be tied into a story regarding the 12th house for ourselves. So the rule of the 12th house is opposing the Jupiter. And by that, what we can see is that there are habits that this person is having. There may potentially be habits that this person is having that are directly coming in conflict with them. And it's also directly coming in conflict with them being able to establish the greatest amount of financial security within their lives. And why we say establish the greatest amount of financial security within their lives is because this Mars is in Capricorn, but it's retrograde. And while we prefer Mars to be in Capricorn above all else, the retrogradation, it does something to spoil something within the heart of the Mars. And we know from Bethem Centalopium that he says that a planet retrograde is like a man infirm, stupefied, and solicitous. He also says that a planet in its own domicile retrograde is like a sick man at home. So we get the sense that this person's Mars should be functioning far better than it does, but it isn't. By virtue of the retrogradation, but also by virtue of the fact that this Mars is ruling this person's 12th house. Now, let's just take a look at Mars in our declination table to see where. Oh, so Mars is out of bounds, it's retrograde, and it's also ruling the 12th house, and it's also opposing the Jupiter. And anything that Jupiter touches, Jupiter magnifies, we know, which means that the Jupiter is magnifying the 12th house virtues of this Mars within this person's chart. Now, some of the things we do in the 12th house is we eat that slice of cheesecake late at night when we know we shouldn't, or we drink too much alcohol, or we take too much of any substance, or we do things that are fundamentally destructive is a strong word, but destructive is the word. We do things that are fundamentally not the best for our well-being. And here we see this Mars is saying that, yes, indeed, these things tie in this person's pleasures as well as this person's self-undoing. So does this person have the ability to pull themselves back, or are they constantly propelled forward even when they know they shouldn't be, essentially? Are they constantly propelled forward in doing things that fundamentally harm themselves, but also doing things that fundamentally harm their finances? Now, why are we talking about the Mars in relation to the finances? Because we see that this Mars, by virtue of that same 5-degree rule, which puts our Jupiter in the 8th house, is the same 5-degree rule that puts this Mars in the 2nd house. So Mars in Capricorn is an engine. I have the power and the ability to make money. Making money is something very meaningful to me. It's something that really matters to me. It's something that I really want to do, are things that we see in that regard. But the Mars in Capricorn retrograde ruling the 12th house, ruling the 5th house says that, but my spending isn't necessarily the wisest. I'm not really making the most amount of sense in terms of how I spend money within the world. And by virtue of that, this Mars in the 2nd house has the effect of burning through my resources, not just helping me establish my resources in a stronger way, but this Mars has the effect of me burning through my resources. And so maybe because of that, I do find myself needing to rely on the financial well-being of other people around me. And it's not because I'm a bad person, but it's just because this is a part of my life that I haven't really brought under the fullest amount of control yet. Now, we're wrapping up this chart reading so that we can dive into one more. But the Mars is going to definitely be an issue. And the Mars is going to be an issue also in terms of my own family affairs. Why in terms of my own family affairs? Because that Jupiter is ruling the ascendant, but it's also ruling the 4th house. So we have the rule of the 12th house in opposition to essentially the rule of the 4th house. And there's a feeling associated with that in terms of the household and in terms of the home that's a little bit edgy. Let's see if we could wrap this up. There's another thing that I do, and that would usually be on this chart, and it's not on this chart because sometimes I take it off, especially when I'm doing horary where it doesn't belong. But I'm always interested in seeing where the Chiron situation is. Now, shoot me, I've been using Chiron for the past 3 years. I find that Chiron gives us a lot of bang for our buck. And here we have this Chiron is in the second house as well at 27 degrees, which means that in it's in a loose opposition to the Uranus. And we can't really say much about that because these are very slow moving planets. So what are you going to really talk about? You can't personalize something that moves so slowly. So the final thing that we want to say before we move on to this is that this moon is here in the third house. The third house is the house of siblings. The moon is ruling this eighth house of death, essentially death and other people's money. So we're wondering if there's a connection between the third house of siblings and the eighth house of death, and also from there to there, this eighth house would essentially be the sixth house for the siblings. So do I have siblings who deal with sixth house affairs? And sixth house affairs we know are sicknesses and things that ail the body and things that take away from someone's ability to be healthy, someone's ability to remain healthy. So with the ruler of the siblings, sixth house, in their first house, we want to know, is there a relationship between this person's siblings as well as this person's siblings' relationship to sickness? And does this become a fundamental thing or does this become a fundamental part of the rock upon which my family is built? And then the final thing is that the ruler of the siblings is this Saturn, and this Saturn from the third, we have the 12th, we have the 11th, we have the 10th, we have the 9th. So we have Saturn over here in its own ninth house, because if this is the third house, this is the seventh house, eighth, ninth. And the ninth house is a house of foreign travel, and it's a house of places far away. So one of the things that we can say or ask is, does this person live far away from their siblings? If there are siblings involved, does this person live in a foreign country? Or rather, does the siblings live in a foreign country far away from the person or far away from their fundamental household and home? Now, the very final thing is the Mercury, which is ruling the seventh house, is here in the eighth house, which is further amplifying the relationship that this person is having within their marriage to money, but also the relationship that their own spouse is having to the money that occurs within this household and home. But it's also in the eighth house. There is no other, let's see, it's a 20, so it isn't really picking up anything massively. It's picking up the Venus. So there's nothing really massively happening in terms of other aspects that we haven't already identified. So the final statement that we have about all of that is that, one, we get a further confirmation about this person being supported by the money that they have within their relationships from their spouse, from their partner. Two, we've seen the reasons why the family situation becomes such a big deal for this person, and how that can even become a point of friction or a point of hardship within this person's life. Three, we've seen how the ruler of the fifth house, being that Mars in opposition to the Jupiter, can also be an indication of a friction between the things that the fifth house represents, which could be children as well. So a fundamental inbuilt natal promise of this person being, in a sense, in friction with their loved ones or with their children, and that being a furthering of the reason why their household and home becomes such a big deal to them. A Sagittarian person being overly consumed by the affairs of their household and home is a sight to behold. And is it because there are these fundamental tensions that exist there that remain a part of this person's life? Now, that is it for this. And so I'm going to turn it over to whoever's chart this is to talk to us about it, and then we'll move on. We have 20 minutes left, but I just want to take one tiny look at something. 32. And oh, okay. So this is a Saturn story. Saturn is at 32 degrees 49 minutes, and the sun moon midpoint is at 32 degrees 50 minutes. So the burden of life fundamentally falls squarely on the shoulders of this person, which even furthers the family situation. The burdens of the family falls on my shoulders. The burden of the household and home falls upon my shoulders. When things fall apart, it falls back on me, sort of thing. When things break apart, it falls back firmly and squarely onto me. And so this person moves through life. Yes, a Sagittarius, which is fundamentally what we want to always bear in mind, that the light fire within the heart of a Sagittarius doesn't necessarily want to be consumed by the heaviness of responsibility, but we find that this person, as they move through life, constantly find themselves thrust into roles and positions of responsibility, kind of whether they like it or not. So anyway, whose person is this?
Hi, it is my person.
Okay, and who's speaking?
This is Liz Wickhart.
Hey, Liz. Hey, Liz. And so talk to us about this chart and talk to us about some of the things you would have said about this.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty, I mean, I have no idea the mystery of your ways, so it was really interesting to watch you unpack all that. But it's extremely aligned. So this person is this very bubbly, jovial, quick-minded, interested in everything kind of person. And in her life, she made lots of money, but really in the last, I would say 30 years, she's been relying on her husband's money, and her health has really deteriorated. And she said to me on numerous occasions that she knows it's because of him. And he's this very sort of difficult, diabolical person who, in some ways, she keeps together through feeding him, as you mentioned, and all of these things. But it's this really hard drain. And of course, it does fall back on her. She sort of has, although she seems to be the person behind the scenes, she's really holding everything and everyone together. Her siblings are really important to her. They do live on the other side of the country from her. And she worries about them a lot as well. She's an amazing artist and cook and healer, and she loves to do retreats with people. And when you talk to her, you feel fabulous because that's what she does. And yeah, I would say all of it is pretty just right on the money.
Awesome sauce. Was there something that you felt didn't align?
No, which is surprising. No, it really aligned well. And I think part of it too is because I don't like the way you got to things was not necessarily how I know how to get to things. So I thought just so interesting, especially the Uranian piece, but that really is apropos.
Awesome. Okay. Sam, take it away. Masterclass chart number 2. Tell me.
17th of September, 1982.
1982.
At 3:05 a.m. in Nelson, Canada.
I thought you were going to say Nelson Mandela. Okay, Nelson, Canada. And okay, so here and male or female?
Oh, you know what? Just a second. Let me see if it's. I do not know. Let me give you a different one.
No, I mean, we could live with this one. I just hope that it's a dramatic one. Not quite enough drama, but we'll do it. All right, let's go, Sam. As you can tell, I love drama. Okay, what we're going to do with this one is we are going to take a look at this on the 90-degree dial because, once again, why wouldn't we? And we'll interpret it fully on the 90-degree dial and then pop back over to their regular schmegular pizza pie chart to see if there's any information. Okay, so now we have another chart. Sam, do you have a gender identity for me with this person as yet? No? Okay, we're moving on. So here we have the chart of this person, and this is the chart on the 90-degree dial. Now, the 90-degree dial need not be this boogeyman in the closet because all it is another way of looking at a chart and identifying aspects quickly within a chart. So when we were in the Renaissance and the medieval period, we presented charts in a square shape. As we moved on, we started to present charts in a round shape. You can present charts in a linear shape, as in a line. And the 90-degree dial is only one other way of presenting the same chart that you have with the same sort of information that's within it. So that being said, the very first thing that I see when I see this chart is that their sun is here standing with Neptune. Now, this is important within the chart of this person because this person is ruled by the sun, because this person has 16 degrees Leo rising. However, when we switch over to the 90-degree dial, we really don't care about rulerships in that sense. We care about the planets and the things that those planets say within themselves. So with the Sun Neptune, we're getting another indication that here's another person who's a dreamer, but also with this person, we have a little bit more of an escapist quality insofar as Neptune is this planet that has the ability to create an oceanic experience for all of us. So here's this person who probably fundamentally wants to escape the world and escape reality and finds very specific ways of doing that within their lives. Maybe that's through music, maybe that's through some other stuff. Wink, wink. But we have this sense of whenever there's a Sun Neptune contact of a person having a fundamental porousness. So probably today is the day to be talking about things within the chart that I don't want to say weaken. Weaken would be the wrong word, but things within a chart that fundamentally melts some of my own identity, which causes me to be that much more perceptive and that much more sensitive to my environment. But also it causes me to be taxed that much more within my environment. This is literally a fish out of water sort of situation. Now, within all of that, this person is having Jupiter standing on the other side of their sun, which means this Jupiter is either 45 degrees away from the sun or at the Saskey quadrate to the sun. So with Jupiter standing on the opposite side of the sun, what we get is, once again, regardless of all of the other things we said, this is still a fundamentally benevolent, jovial person who steps forward into the world in that way. So we have echoes in this chart that we would have seen within the other charts as well. Whenever I see a Neptune contact, however, I'm always a little bit on the edge because the Neptune situation can be a person who has, there's a health component, there's an addictive component, but there's also a general emotional well-being component that we want to look into whenever we have people who are having a Neptunian situation going on with any of their luminaries. And here we have the moon isn't that far from that Neptune either. So this person lives through the world in what could be considered to be a Neptunian dream state, or they're always trying to find that Neptunian dream for them to slip back into because sometimes the dream is that much better than reality. Now, the very next thing that we see is the Sun Neptune is standing on the midpoint of the Mercury Uranus, and the Mercury Uranus says that this person's mind is quick. They move through the world with a lightning agility of their mind, and they know how to get things done on a mental level. So it gives this person dexterity, it gives this person flexibility, but it also gives this person revolutionary thoughts that may not necessarily be within keeping with their larger environment, for lack of a better word. So when we see that, we think that, hey, this is a person who knows how to step forward and just get the thing done. And they may actually be able to get the thing done far better than anybody else around them can get the thing done, because of the ways in which their mind just avails them to the correct information. So we're talking about someone who's fundamentally brilliant, essentially. Now, if I put the pointer down here on the Jupiter, I still roughly am pulling in this Uranus Mercury situation. It's just about there, or rather the Mercury Uranus situation. And so we get the same story compounded, which is, I have these thoughts and I want to share these thoughts, and you're going to be a part of these thoughts too, because I can't stop thinking, and everyone else around me is going to hear me thinking, and they're going to hear me speaking about it. So the Jupiter is essentially the answer to the question of my mind, how does it bring revolution into the world? Or my mind, how does it manifest revolution through my body? Well, my mind manifests revolution and insight and intuition through my body in a big Jupiterian sort of way. So I have big visions, I have big thoughts, I use my mind as a vehicle of the dreams and the fantasies, but really of the solutions that I see within the world. So we see that this person is a very solution oriented person, just on the basis of everything. Now, what you may notice is that I'm moving through this with far more rapidity than I would have moved through with the traditional chart. And the reason is because with the traditional chart, we have that much more things to take into consideration. Who is the term ruler? Who is the term ruler? Where is the Dodecata Moria? Where is the D3? What is the semi-square to the ascendant? What is the essential dignity of hoo-ha in the bag? We have all of these things to consider, but one of the beauties of Uranian astrology is that it gives us speed, because it liberates us from the need to actually have to take those things into consideration. Because our astrology, if we were to strip it down to its bare bones and just go back to a purely observation-based astrology, what we would see is the night sky and the planets. We wouldn't see the signs of the zodiac. We wouldn't see the tropical zodiac at all, but we'd see the night sky and the planets. And that's essentially what Uranian astrology brings us back to, this deep awareness of the planets and how the planets operate within the sky and how the planets operate with each other. So we have said all of this. This person is a lightning fast thinker. But the fact that I think in a lightning fast way, and I'm already a Sun, Moon, Neptune person, makes me wonder if this person has the ability to handle those thoughts that they're thinking of. Because if I'm already a Sun, Moon, Neptune person, I already come into the world sleepy. I'm already tired from make my grand debut out of my mother's uterus. And you're gonna give me the mind of Einstein on top of that? So when we have the mind of Einstein being on top of this person, what it can cause is an excessive amount of nervousness, an excessive amount of jitteriness, and an excessive amount of nervous talking, because it's like I want to relieve some of the steam off of my mind and off of my brain by virtue of it just moving far too quickly. So we have that. Now, the other thing that we quickly want to take note of is, are we pulling in anything else? Well, we're pulling in the Aries and the Chronos, which is important. We're also pulling in the Mars-Saturn. So the Mars-Saturn definitely makes me wonder about the health of this person. Mars-Saturn is one of the things that we look for in terms of health and longevity at all. I even know traditional astrologers who drop in the Mars-Saturn midpoint in order to see how their health is being impacted. And so here we have the Mars Saturn being pulled in. And so it makes me wonder about the health of this person's body. Does this person come into a world where their body is already something that, yes, is Neptunian insofar as the boundary between their body and the world is somehow diminished? Or are they stepping into the world in a way where they come in with struggles, period? Like they come into physical manifestation, physical materialization with struggles of the body. Now, we also bring in the struggles of the body situation because when we had the pointer on the Aries point, we saw the midheaven Chiron standing there with the Aries. And the midheaven Chiron is saying to us that my relationship with sickness, sickness being a Chironian word, or my relationship with isolation or my relationship with wounding is a part of my relationship to the world at large. So what we have to identify is this person's wounding? Is this person's sickness? Or are they just trafficking with people who are generally ill on the day to day? Now, the other thing that we see here when we bring in the midheaven is that we have the Jupiter-Pluto. Jupiter-Pluto, and we have the Chronos. So the Jupiter-Pluto by itself is a sign of wealth, and not just regular schmegular wealth, but the sort of wealth that you want to write home about. So we see that. And then we see the midheaven literally either in a 45 or a 135 to the Chronos. So what we see within this person is the kernel. This is what the book, The Rules for Planetary Pictures, would say. What we see within this person is the kernel for greatness and the kernel for them to be a great mental leader within the world. And I say mental because we saw how deeply interwoven the Mercury Uranus was within the nature of this person already. And so here we have again the Mercury ascendant. My mind, midheaven Mercury, is how I interact and how I operate with my environment at large. I move through the environment and I have Leo vibes, not because my sun is ruling my Leo ascendant, but because my midheaven is fundamentally having this tight aspect to Chronos. I step forward into the world and I expect excellence of myself. I expect excellence of other people. And that is how I move through the world. Maybe I move through the world in a very calculating, mercurial sort of way, where my mind is what makes sense of things around me. And this is fundamentally a part of how I attract massive amounts of wealth within my life, that I am a mental leader in whatever field I find myself in, or whatever I find myself doing, essentially. Now, what else do we have with this? We have the Admetos Poseidon equaling the midheaven, and also still with that Chronos. So is this person a specialist? And is the act of specialization something that's deeply important for this person, that they need to be a specialist in whatever field they enter? Because once again, here we have the Saturn standing on the small dot. Maybe you could see that small dot, but that small dot is essentially 11 and a quarter away from the midheaven, which is an aspect within Uranian astrology, the aspect of 11 and a quarter degrees of arc. People think that 10-degree orbs work. It isn't that the 10-degree orbs work, it's that the 10-degree orb is close to the 11 and a quarter orb. So if you use wide orbs in astrology of 10 degrees and you have aspects in your chart that have this 10-degree relationship and you're like, oh, this works because of my 10-degree arc opening, it's essentially working not because of the 10 degrees, which doesn't really mean anything, but it's working because it's a derivative of this 11 and a quarter. So this person is having the midheaven Saturn as well. So maybe when whoever hears me talking about this chart heard me talking about the other chart, these people sound similar in that the midheaven Saturn is, I too come into the world with a great deal of responsibility on my shoulders. And by way of me having this great deal of responsibility on my shoulders, I am the one who takes care of the others. I am the one who takes care of everything. Therefore, I do have to be a specialist. I do have to be a master at my field. I do have to be really damn good, because it is expected of me. And so what we bear in mind as we look at this person is the expectations that this person has probably thrust upon them as they step out into the world. Now, is there anything else that we're seeing? We're seeing that this midheaven is within range of the Chiron node. And the Chiron node is saying that this person is probably interacting with sick people. Sick people because Chiron is sick and node is people. So 1 + 1 = 2. Chiron node is my connections within the world are with people who need assistance. You know, my sick people within the world, or my connection to sickness and illness, is within the international relationships that I have with others. I say international relationships because we have the node Apollon, and Apollon has to do with international relationships within the world. So, you know, is this person like Mother Teresa or UNICEF or something, taking care of sick people around the world as a part of just what they do and as a part of this extension of their Neptunian heart, which just wants to take care of people in general? So we see that going on already. And if we were to look more specifically, and this person is dealing with dirty jobs. Dirty jobs. So we have the Hades Aries equaling their midheaven, and the Hades Aries is also giving us this concept that the stuff that I'm doing within the world, it's the deep and the dark and the dirty and the nitty gritty, and it's probably not necessarily the sort of thing that everyone wants to do. It's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, but it works for me because that's just built in to my own story and into my own situation. So we're taking a look at their Mars, and we see that the Mars is tying in their Sun, Neptune on their midheaven. So whatever they do in terms of their work is something that they feel very idealistically connected to. So if you feel idealistically connected to your work, maybe your work is probably serving a greater creative cause within the world, essentially, is what that could mean. Let's take a look at their work pictures. Mars Aries is tying in who? Mars Aries brings in the Vulcanus, or Mars node brings in the Vulcanus. So probably they're very passionate and very strong and very committed to the work that they're doing is what we find. But that still doesn't give us all the information we're looking for. So let's do the Mars to the Aries. And we get the Admeto showing up again. So that's the thing of being a specialist. This is another family person. They have Moon Cupido, and the Moon Cupido is the family of women, or to be connected to a family chock full of women. And so probably this person comes from a household full of women, and that's just the reality of the house environment that they're coming from. And when we had the pointer on the Sun, we saw the Cupido Admeto standing there on the Jupiter. So yes, maybe I come from a small, tight-knit family full of women, or maybe I come from a small, tight-knit family in which it's governed by the matriarch, essentially. Now, we are going to jump off of this right now at this moment. Their love situation is precarious. They're having midheaven Saturn equaling their Venus. Now, your love situation, so these two charts, it's uncanny how similar they sound. These two charts sound very similar again. And it's rather uncanny. Midheaven Saturn, which means the things that bring me grief, or the things that bring me hardship, or the things that bring me pain, or the things that bring me responsibility that no one's grateful for, is my Venus. And my Venus has to do with my love relationships that I'm creating within the world. Now, let's pop over here, take a look at the chart in the traditional context, and quickly also take a look at their declinations, because your boy got to go. Okay, so by virtue of their declination, they're having Moon Saturn contra-parallel by declination, which already takes us into the frame of mind of thinking that the household and the home was precarious, and the household and the home didn't really necessarily feel like some place where I received the best amount of feeding, or it doesn't really feel like someplace where I received the the best amount of care. While the household and home may be a place that has wealth within it, we see the Jupiter here in the fourth house, Jupiter ruling the fifth house. The fifth house is the wealth of my ancestors. So while the household and home does have this sense of wealth within it, the household and home also has this sense of death within it. And we say death because the Jupiter is ruling the eighth house, and the eighth house is the house of death. So we want to know if and when, at the age of 5 or 6 years old, what was the major death occurrence that happened within the life of this person? And 25, 25. And what else happened when they were 7 years old? So we're looking at the age of 5, we're looking at the age of 7, and we're investigating what would have happened within the life of this person at those two ages that was overwhelming and that no child should have experienced, essentially. And how did that set up the structure for this person to continue to move throughout the world and throughout their lives, feeling fundamentally not taken care of? Now that I'm looking at this as a traditional chart, I'm seeing all sorts of stuff. Because the other thing that we see is that this chart is contained fully within the boundary of the nodes. And within Vedic astrology, this is called Kala Sarpa Yoga. And Kala Sarpa Yoga means to be bitten by the snake of time. Kala is time, Sarpa is snake, Yoga is union. So to be bitten by the snake of time. And the snake that's biting this person is the snake of the two nodes. Kaput, Draconis, the head of the dragon, Kau, the Draconis, the tail of the dragon. This person's life is contained within that. So, why? Whenever we say something in astrology, we always have to ask ourselves why. Why would this person feel so strongly bitten by the serpent of time? And so we poke around a bit. And as we poke around, what we see is this Mars, which is ruling the fourth house, is in opposition to Chiron, which is conjunct Algol. So Chiron conjunct Algol, as being the planet with the highest elevation within this chart, casts a Chironian web over this person's entire life. So death and sickness and things of that nature are things that this person is very much familiar with. Period. Now, there's so much to say about this. This is another chart where my partner is, this person was born in 1982. Maybe some of these things haven't manifested within their lives yet. But the Saturn-Pluto is saying that once again, oh my God, and they have the Saturn-Pluto by declination. The Saturn-Pluto is saying that once again, my partner is an overwhelming source of underworld stuff within my life. And maybe there is excessive pressure within the relationship between my partner and myself, and it doesn't really allow me to feel as if I'm being served in the best sort of way. There's so much in this chart, we're not going to get through it in time, but the Mars Chiron is making me wonder about the fundamental death process or the fundamental sickness process that may have happened within this person's household and home when I gave you the ages as a child. But also now we want to ask what would have happened within this person's life when they were roughly around the age of 26 years old. Because at the age of 26, the IC would have come to that Mars by solar arc direction. So how was this re-traumatizing effect re-triggered within their lives at around the age of 26 years old? So this person's sun moon midpoint is at 38, 37. So we go down and we take a look at 38, 37, and Jupiter is there. So that's the benevolence piece, but also Neptune is there. So is there a chronic sense of dissatisfaction that this person finds themselves interacting with within the marriage and within the marital reality? Am I fundamentally dissatisfied within the marital space? And let us just quickly take a look at the 22.5. So that goes down to 1607, 1607. Here we have the moon, we have the Uranus, we have the Jupiter. So the connections that we make are formed quickly, but those same connections may also be connections that aren't really formed with the most amount of stability because we have the Uranus there. The moon Neptune is fools rush in. So maybe I do rush in head first into my love situations. And maybe by virtue of rushing into my love situations, I'm rushing into situations that don't necessarily have the most amount of stability beneath them. And then the final thing that we do is 5.625, 5.625, take a look, 452, 452 node, Uranus. So is there a theme of potential infidelity that occurs within their marital life and their marital home that causes the breaking apart of the relationship that they find themselves in or relationships that they find themselves in? And do they constantly find themselves undergoing these painful transformations within their emotional life, within their environment, because of how badly they want to connect, but also because in wanting to connect so badly, I sometimes move without the greatest amount of discretion in terms of forming deep commitments and attachments to people within my life. Okay, that is it. Whose chart is this?
It was mine.
It was yours as in it was yours as in it was your personal chart.
No, it wasn't mine. No, this is just somebody I know.
Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how was it?
I'd say probably an 8. You nailed the bit about the solar arc. When this person was 26, they lost their father. As far as I know, the 5 or 7, I don't know about that. But the loss of the father was very traumatic, and that occurred when they were 26, 27, I think. What else? Definitely the Neptune stuff makes a lot of sense. The Neptune combined with the fast mind is kind of a sense of instability because of being very like a nervous person or an anxious prone person, but also being somewhat prone to wanting to escape or dream. This person is a musician, so that makes sense. Yeah, I think it was pretty good. Came from the Moon Cupido thing. Came from a strong matriarchal family, a small family. So yeah, pretty damn good, I think.
Awesome sauce.